Yo, 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 what is going on, CoD Familia? It is your boy BN, aka Mr. Kingdom Builder, and I wanted to talk today about the rumored speculation of how migration is going to work. So, I've been told some things from some sources I trust, but as always, just like we mentioned in the last video, right, this is not confirmed, it's not official, it hasn't been said by the CoD dev team, but I thought it would be interesting to talk about what I am hearing and how that could factor into either a player's choice and option for where they could go and how they could move, along with how, if you're on the receiving end as the home kingdom, how is that something that can put you, or what can you do to put your kingdom in the best position to be attractive for players and or groups and or alliances that may want to come there. So we're going to talk about all that. Let's start off first with what are we actually hearing, what is being said about how migration could work in, and maybe we'll hear that in the next update or later. So there's four main things I'm going to talk about here, right? Before we even touch, let's preface with what we know so far. Season 1 is where you start off in your home kingdom. Season 2/1+ is where you start off in a merged kingdom, essentially a forced KVK, with 4 to 6 other kingdoms. Now, from what we mentioned in the previous video with how Season 3 could work, is where you may get demerged from Season 2 and go back to your home kingdom. So now let's start with our 4 points. Number 1, migration in this example could be opening when Season 3 arrives. There would be, number 2, there would be a 3-day window. However, we don't know when and what point in time migration would open. Would it open right after Season 2 finishes and you go into Season 3? Would it open a week after? That we do not know. Number 2, there would be a 3-day window where players could move out and or come in. Number 3, you'd only be able to migrate to kingdoms in your merged group. So an example, if you look at Kingdom SS1-2, right, which originally started as Kingdoms 1 through 4 in the beta, however, now added on Kingdoms 5 and 6, so it's Kingdoms 1 through 6 for SS1-2. So that means that if these kingdoms were to get demerged, and if migration was to work out this way, Kingdoms 1 through 6 could go to and from each other, right? But they couldn't do anything beyond that, at least as of now, and again, what we're hearing. And then number 4, and this is interesting to me, it will cost gems to move, which is interesting because we didn't hear anything about, them putting in, like if you think about it, there's no migration scrolls, there's nothing like that at the moment that's in the game. So the fact that they're, again, if this plays out that way, would be reducing the amount of extra work you'd have to do and just keeping it really simple. I actually kind of like that idea of just using gems compared to adding a whole nother item in the game where you have to buy something separate. It's already in the game. Just use the current resource. I actually like this idea. But now let's talk about how migration could affect. And this kind of goes into what we talked about with the demerging video, is the importance of understanding the value of your home kingdom and what you have to offer and or what you can bring to the table. Now, if you're a player, again, you might think to yourself, this is kind of rough. If it plays out this way, I'm only going to be able to move to one of 4 to 6 kingdoms, depending on who's in my group. And maybe you like some options, maybe you don't like some options. The challenge here, I will say, and let me preface this by saying, if they do this as a way to start the initial migration, but then they open up the migration pool larger at a later time, I almost tend to believe that has to be the approach, like that will eventually happen, again, in this theoretical situation. However, the challenge then becomes, well, if you're, in this example, if you're looking at Kingdoms 1 through 6, we'll just use this as an example. Let's just say that 3 or 4 of the kingdoms just don't have a lot of activity. It could become easy for a snowball effect to occur because the pool of options is not big enough, where you then say, well, I'm not going to go to these kingdoms that don't have a lot of activity. I'm going to go to these 1 or 2 kingdoms and just funnel there because they have all the activity. So that's something to consider as well, is that by limiting it to a small pool, you are almost inherently creating a situation where you could, again, right, you could create more inactivity in other kingdoms, bearing in mind, I mean, it is what it is, right? It's not like every kingdom is going to be able to essentially sustain themselves for a long period of time because, again, players will always leave and players will always want to go to certain places. So, that will always happen. But, again, this is one area I believe on how it could affect if it plays out this way for the kingdoms, where you're just basically it's almost like you're kind of taking the merge concept and you're amplifying it to then migrating within their group, where you could almost then make the argument that whichever alliances are still active and healthy by the end of Season 2 could be the eligible bachelors or bachelorettes for when migration opens within that pool for Season 3, right? It's kind of like they're advertising themselves like they're on a campaign the entire time during Season 2. So, again, I'm just looking at it in that type of realistic way where, again, if it plays out in that way, once again, it will be interesting to see if we just get that funneling effect or if there will be some spread out diversity for kingdoms within their merge group pools for migration opening. Now, let's talk about the player side. So if you're a player and you're looking at, well, how do I figure out, how do I decide where I may go in this example? Well, one of the things you should be doing is making an account in every kingdom. And it's pretty easy to do that. Right, you just go to settings, you go account, you go create new character, you click, you do confirm. And then you just have to go past the tutorial. Like, that's really it. You just have to get past the tutorial, and then you will be able to view the rankings. You'll be able to look around the map as well. The only thing you won't have access to is just the Augur Stone, which really isn't a big deal, right? If you're just going in there to scout, to look at, maybe you go in and you want to look at, okay, well, what's the top 200 power? As an example, right? So you'd scroll down all the way and you look at, okay, well, so 200 powers here. You'll look at, maybe their personal merits, even though that might actually be reset at that time unless you're going in there early enough. Well, to be fair, you actually would, and let me also say this because I'm realizing you would have to do this probably before the Merge Kingdom came, right? So, because again, I didn't state that, but ideally that's what you'd want to do. You'd want to go in and state it. Look at these kingdoms before the merged season came up, and then probably do it afterwards, but you really would want to do it before, because that way you would get an idea on how was that kingdom, what was the health, what was the overall state of that kingdom before going into the merged season, because you won't be able to, if you try, you just won't be able to make an account in that once the merged season happens. You'll have to wait for this potential demerge to occur. But you'd go in, you'd look at the players, you would look at alliance power, right, to see how many healthy or active alliances do they have. You might look at maybe alliance merits, as I said, some personal merits. Maybe you look at how many Castle 25s they have in there, right? Again, just trying to look at a lay of the land. You'd probably go through and, how many people do they have in Zone 3? Is it something where they're sharing with other players in Zone 3, or do they just kind of keep everything for themselves? Is it a 1 or 2 alliance rank kingdom? Does that fit the type of mold that you're looking for? Are you looking for something else? These are important things that you want to try to assess before you decide on where to go. And then once you start maybe getting some options down, you'd want, and I'll probably make more of a deep dive video on like how to appropriately assess kingdoms based on what you as an individual are looking for. But then the next step is you'd want to reach out to leaders and or officers. Do they have a Discord? Try and reach out to someone if you need to ask some additional questions, or just kind of say, hey, I'm interested in coming in. Right, those are things that you would typically do to kind of go through that process. Again, then we kind of get to the whole, right, let's tie this into that first come, first served option, where if, I'll tie this in loosely before I get to the next point, which is that if it does happen that way, there's just no guarantee you'll be able to get in. But if you are able to get in, you can at least put yourself in a position to where you already have something lined up, right? And that's kind of the point there. So now let's talk about the opposite side. Let's say you're the kingdom and you're looking to try and give your group the best possible benefits, or put your kingdom in the best position you can to attract players, right? There's going to be a few ways to do that. Where if you're a 1 alliance rank kingdom and you just have everything, usually those types of kingdoms are usually attracting more spenders than they are necessarily free to play. Typically, any kingdoms that I would argue are 2 to 3 alliances in a Zone 3 are usually attracting and looking for more spender players. But again, this starts off a little bit lower when you're at 3 alliances, and then it just incrementally goes up as you get to 2 and 1, because it's a lot easier to fill those types of players into smaller alliances where you only have limited player capacity. So it just makes sense on why you typically see kingdoms on average that will apply that approach, whether they're doing it directly or indirectly or passively. That's just usually what I see very often. Now, if you're getting to 4 alliances or more, right, that's where you're having a lot more, in my opinion, a lot more free-to-play friendly of an environment, because it just shows that, one, the kingdom was able to sustain for a longer period of time, which means that they were able to keep the kingdom as healthy as possible, keep as many alliances engaged in the kingdom as they were able to do. And because of that, there's a higher likelihood that you're going to see a healthier mix of free-to-play versus spenders within the alliances when it comes to Zone 3. And again, bear in mind, this is just my general rule of thumb for what I've experienced playing quite a few kingdom builders and playing in a lot of kingdoms. And on top of that, researching and spending time to go and ask questions and to collect my own data and information to educate myself. So then for you as a kingdom, right, you have to identify, well, what are your selling points, right? So is my selling point that I have one alliance that has all the best buffs of the behemoth, so it's going to allow for players to come in to maximize on events and to max out their account as fast as possible? Will I sell that? Will I use that same type of positioning for a 2 or 3 alliance ran server? Will I tell people that if I have 4 or more alliances in Zone 3, that maybe we're more free-to-play friendly and we have a healthy amount of spots for free-to-play, so maybe that can attract larger groups? Because you also have to consider that if you have more shells or more alliances available in Zone 3, it gives you more opportunities to attract larger groups, whereas if you only have 1 or 2 alliances in Zone 3, in this example, you may not have as many inactive slots with only a few alliances because you've already done so much condension throughout Zone 1, Zone 2, and then into Zone 3. So these are things you have to look at how you go about selling your kingdom and kind of putting a pitch together for what would attract players to come there. And then you can obviously get into things like, your KVK record or your Merge Kingdom records if you want to touch or talk about that. As far as being able to capture Dragon, I'm sure that will eventually be a selling point for some. If they end up adding in other types of Merge Kingdom events or leaderboards or scales, or they add in some type of AOO or Alliance versus Alliance type mode, which I think we've heard about, right? I'm sure we'll probably see accolades being worked into ads there as well. And then really from there, touching on, I want to say lastly, the first come first served option, which is, and then and I already kind of mentioned the gems, but I just want to lastly do a little bit of a touch here on the first come first serve. So the reason I find this interesting is because there is no king tools, right? You don't have that in CoD, whereas you had those in games like Infinity Kingdom and Rise of Kingdoms, etc., where you cap the final objective in Zone 3 or in the middle of the map, and you then have the ability to send kingdom mails, to have management tools available to you. I'll say this, I actually really love this concept. I love the concept of being able to truly view it as a kingdom, because sure, you can make the argument that CoD is focusing more on the alliances themselves, but one alliance is going to cap Dragon at the end, right? So it's almost as though you're giving them something to also fight for, but also an opportunity to use tools in a way that can educate and inform the kingdom, along with things like gifts. I just think there's a lot of good things that can come from having king or queen tools, I should say, in the game. And obviously, I think there's a lot of opportunity to expand on what Rock was doing. I think Rock really just kind of only scratched the surface on the utilization for king tools. That again, it could have been so much better than what it currently is. However, given those are not in here, I think them coming up with a first come first serve system is obviously the next best thing. I want to say this, that if that does come to pass, and I wanted to state this for the record, I personally do not agree with that. The reason I do not agree with that is because I just think it leaves too many things up to chance. It's basically the same way that Infinity Kingdom did theirs, where they just allowed for the people to set a cap, and then anyone under that cap could come in, right? I like the idea of being able to give the option in the king or queen's hands where they can accept or deny people that are coming in through migration. Being able to have that level of autonomy within your kingdom is something that I think is incredibly important to health and overall sustainability in a kingdom. However, what we can surmise is that the game is trending more in a alliance based, because by them doing it at first come first serve, that just adds a level of volatility and uncertainty to kingdoms. Because if it's first come first serve, you could have anyone come in. You could have people come in that have ill intentions and they just want to go in because the kingdom's healthy and they're just going to go in rogue and fight anyone and everyone. And there's no control that you have to stop that. So I can make the argument that the worst case scenario is far worse than the best case scenario, right? So, excuse me. See, you're hearing the cops coming up now. So, excuse me. Thank you. My point being that there is a less margin of error when you are able to control these things versus not being able to control anything. And so that is my biggest worry, is the potential worst case scenario that could happen because of the fact that it would be first come first serve. Again, we don't know all the details in this hypothetical, but it is something that I'm worried about as I'm dying while talking. That's going to be where I end it. Thank you guys so much. If you're still watching and tuning in, I hope you enjoyed this soliloquy, if you will, this TED Talk on potential migration. And what I would love to know is your thoughts, right? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Have you heard something else that I haven't heard? I would, again, even if it's just rumored or speculation, I'd love to hear about it. So let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. That's going to be it for me. As always, until next time, I will catch you later.